a big welcome to all of you here. Ben Hartman's my name, and you're in our propagation house here at Clay Bottom Farm. And what I'm going to do here is a training in how we use the Paperpot transplanter tool on our farm. And I'm going to begin showing with a bit of a slide presentation. And I'm going to share the charts that we use with our Paperpot tool. And I'm really going to be honest with you about pros and cons too, and try to help you decide if it's the right investment, the right tool for your farm. And then I'm going to get off the presentation, and I'm going to show you how to use the parts of the system. And we're actually going to walk out to the greenhouse, and I'll show you how we do transplanting with the tool. So welcome again, everyone who's just logged in. Repeat myself that I cannot see the chat, but I can see Q&A. So there's a Q&A tab in the bottom center. And as you have questions, please put them in. And I hope we have a fun back and forth time here. I'll go for about an hour and 15 minutes, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions at a couple break points in the middle and at the end. Okay, so first, I want a big thank you to Ni10 Paperpot in Japan, who is sponsoring this event and making it available to you free of charge, with lots of support from John Henriksen at Small Farm Works. Without these two, it wouldn't be possible to make this happen. These are my friends, colleagues, John Henriksen. I'm, of course, in the middle. Shinano-san and Hosawa-san, and John Henriksen and me. And the idea for this webinar, really it's a joint project. We all sat down and helped design the format that we're going to go through tonight. So these folks from international sales at Paperpot have been to our farm a few times, and I've enjoyed a long multi-year relationship with that wonderful company. Who we are on our farm, for those of you who are new to the Clay Bottom Farm ecosphere, we're a 4-season micro farm in Indiana in our 17th year of operation. We're small. We sell to a co-op, 2 restaurants, and primarily 2 restaurants, and then a small community-supported agriculture program. Almost all of our food sells close to home, within a 1.5 miles of our farm. We're a hyper-local farm that's very important to us, and it helps keep our costs in check. We're a 1/3 acre in production, about 15,000 square feet, with 2 part-time staff, an assistant farm manager who's a year-round staff, and then a summer field assistant, spring, summer, and fall field assistant here at the farm. And they're both behind the scenes making all the tech work. So thank you to Nicole and Andrew for your part. So ways to engage further, I've got Lean Farm books, of course, you're probably familiar with. You can buy these anywhere books are sold. I have a Lean Market Growing Master class where it's a deep dive into how we earn a living on such a small parcel of land, and showing you how you can do it too. 35% off in March. Go to our website for sign up. And I want to give a shout out to Growing for Market. Nella Mae Parks wrote a wonderful article about Paperpot in the most recent issue. And so you can see a couple of websites to get to that'll point you in some directions if you're looking for more information. Here's an overview picture of our farm. Most of the crops you're seeing in here were planted with that Paperpot transplant system. In fact, we designed our farm just for that tool, which we've been using for almost 10 years. You're going into our 10th season using the Paperpot tool. This is the crew, Nicole on the as you see it on the left, and Andrew on the right, helping us out, and Rachel next to me, and our kids who actually really love using this tool too. And Chelsea and Mimi, who have an incubator project here at the farm too. So what is the Paperpot system? In a nutshell, what it is a honeycomb of paper that unravels into a chain. We're going to seed our crops into it. We're going to transplant those crops, and the paper chains are going to stay in the ground, and they'll decompose as time goes on. Where can you buy Paperpot supplies? At this point, there are many, many places. This is just a partial list. There are other places beyond what's on this list. We have bought all our things from that you're going to see in this video or in this webinar from Small Farm Works, but many other places sell the tool. A short history of the Paperpots is that the Nippon Sugar Beet Manufacturing was founded in Hokkaido, Japan, 1919. The first chain pots for sugar were designed for sugar beets, sugar beet production in the northern island of Japan, Hokkaido. They have a short growing season there, and then transplanting the beets really helped increase their productivity. In 2005, John Henriksen, who now owns Small Farm Works, pictured here, was traveling in Japan and saw one of these tools in use and said, hey, we've got to make these available to farmers in the US, and started importing and distributing the tool. There are many variations of the tool use in Japan. It's been in use for decades for a wide range of crops, but especially onions and sugar beets. The way Paperpot fits on our farm, we lean heavily into using the lean system, which focuses on removing waste to run your business. And so on one side, there are value-adding processes that you do on your farm where you're touching your product and the value goes up, such as seeding and transplanting. And then there's lots of muda, excess motion, defect. So the Paperpot system removes a lot of waste. And I'll go through all the benefits of it, but just in brief, we reduce wasted motion, we have better products, less defect, there's less burden waste, less waiting waste, we have faster cycle times, and we have more even production on our farm. A lot of these ideas come from Tichy Ono, the Workplace Management book I highly recommend, down in the corner. Is Paperpot the right system for you? There definitely are pros and cons. And when the folks from Nitin were here, they really asked me to be transparent about ways the system works and ways that it doesn't. So let me go through some of the advantages. First, it saves time and cost. This one is huge for a marketed farm. So look at the economics of this. This is how the Paperpot saves us money every year. The cost to transplant 264 plugs by hand. And so each of these chains holds 264 plants. The cost, we pay $20 an hour, and it would take about an hour to do that work by hand. Now, if we're going to transplant one paper chain, which holds, like I said, 264 cells, we can accomplish that in about 10 minutes. And I'm being generous here. You can unravel a chain in about 1 minute, and it takes a bit of time to walk to the field and walk back. So for round numbers, I'm saying 10 minutes, but so you can see that there's quite a bit of time savings. So the total savings per chain that we estimate is about $16 in labor. And we run through about 150 chains each season. And so the total savings comes to about 1,650 per season. And the total time savings per year is about 125 hours. Now, this is very particular, of course, to our farm. And one of the reasons that I think it's wise to research this tool before jumping in is to know, well, would I actually use it that much? And hopefully you'll get some clarity on that during this workshop. So the tool saves, number two advantage, saves effort. It's a human-scaled tool. E.F. Schumacher wrote the book Small is Beautiful and coined the term technology with a human face. There's a human face all over this tool. It's very comfortable to use, lightweight to use, and very simple tool. Third is controlled germination. You can see in this picture just how many seedlings, and there's 264 seedlings in each of these trays. You can fit thousands and thousands of seedlings in a very small space. And your propagation house on many small farms is the most expensive piece of real estate on the farm because of all the heat you have to put into it. And so it really takes advantage of the infrastructure that you have. Fourth advantage is that it speeds up our cycle time. So by transplanting in quick succession, we're going to transplant within usually 2 to 3 weeks of seeding our crop. We can grow more food on one piece of land, on one plot in a growing season. And it's a few other advantages. It's like I said, simple. We've had the tool for going on 10 seasons and have had zero maintenance issues with the tool. There's no engine, no fossil fuels, so it's environmentally eco-friendly tool to use, and it's just cool. It's just a better way to farm if it fits your situation, and it's cool and it's fun. There definitely are some limitations that are worth going over. First, it can leave bits of paper in the field, and you can see in this picture some small bits of paper. The paper does decompose, but it takes time. Sometimes 6 months or more, depending on your conditions. If you have a lot of compost, if you keep the soil moist, there's more decompositional activity, of course, and it decomposes a lot faster. But if you have dry, sandy soil, it can stick around for a long time. The system isn't free. The tool has a cost, and the paper chains do have a cost. They're running now around $5 each for a 6-inch paper chain. And it certainly doesn't work for all crops. I'm showing you a picture of carrots here, which we tried to do with paper pots, but they don't really work well with paper pots. Tomatoes, peppers, and crops that need lots of room that you transplant, typically fairly large crops, haven't worked well for us with the paper pot system. And certainly does not work in all soils. And we will do a deep dive into what it takes to prepare soils for paper pot in a few minutes, but you'll want to know whether the tool would work in the soil type that you have. Heavy clay would be tough, and if you have even partial clay where you have chunks and you don't have small particles, that can make it difficult to work the tool. And then of course there's a learning curve to it. It's not necessarily an out-of-the-box tool. It took us it's a short learning curve, a week or two, but you should not expect to just open the box and start making money with the tool. You have to learn how to use it well, make sure it fits into the system that you have. And then finally, those of you who are pursuing organic certification, it is still under review for organic approval. And many certifying agents are allowing the tool, but it's definitely worth checking before you make that purchase if you're pursuing organic. Okay, let's do a few pictures here of how we use paper pots, and then I'll actually get out some chains and put it together. So first of all is you really, like I said, these chains cost, the chains do have a cost. And so what we do is lay out our farm like this so that it accommodates paper pots. So 2 of these paper pot chains will fill 1 bed that we have. And the math comes out to about 70 feet in length and 42 inches in width. Many small farms use a 30-inch bed width. We added 12 inches to it to accommodate this paper pot system. I'm so glad we did. It's much more efficient. We're a third more efficient with our space because of that change. This is the uniform way that we grow our lettuce, our basil, cilantro, turnips, beets, and many other crops with the 6-inch chains, meaning they separate, the crops are transplanted 6 inches apart from one another in these 70-foot by 42-inch beds. So there's an overhead picture. We can see these 70 feet in length by 42-inch beds, 2 chains of paper pot, and most of the beds that you're looking at here. It's important to mention that we are a no-till farm, and we use what's called a deep mulch system, where we're adding 4 inches of compost directly to the soil surface. So you can see there are chunks in here, there are sticks in here. It is not a pulverized cake-like texture soil, and there's some modifications you can make to the tool that will make it work in these sort of rough soil conditions. When our bed flipping process is kind of important to mention here because it affects the paper pot tool and how we use it. So I want to just show you how we do this when crops are finished, such as the spinach on the left picture and the beans on the right. We'll simply cover up the crop, deprive oxygen and sunlight to the crop, and in the summer those crops will decompose. They'll really melt down into mush within a matter of a week or two, and it certainly takes longer in the fall and spring and the winter. And then once they have decomposed, we'll simply take a rake and rake the residues, and then we can transplant into the stubbles that are left behind. So there are roots that are left in the ground, and we're going to take that paper pot tool, you can see in the right side, that we are transplanting between rows of the previous crop to avoid getting gummed up by the roots. But you can certainly use this tool with a no-till mindset in practice. Okay, I'm going to pause here and just leave the screen showing the chart that we're currently using on our farm for those of you who want to grab a screenshot, and I'm going to answer a couple of Q&A questions. So I have one person saying internet has been going in and out, causing some disconnect, and will the webinar be recorded? And the answer is yes, we are recording, and we'll make the recording available to everyone who's signed up. Another question, Farmer CE says, I have used the paper chain and Paperpot transplanter. I did not find good decomposition of the paper. I had to go through my hand to remove the paper. I also found uneven germination of seeds. So I got to many gaps in what I was planting. And can they improve these issues? So the short answer is they're certainly working on it. I use the hemp Paperpot chains, and these do have a faster decomposition time. And there is a new formula that I'm testing on our farm this season that has an even faster decomposition, because this is an issue that they've heard from several growers, and certainly working on that decomposition. As far as germination, if you can hold that question, hold that thought for a few minutes, I'm going to show you some tricks for getting crops to germinate in here. Are those beans or sunflowers? Those were beans that we covered up with the tarp. And behind, or maybe you're asking about what's behind me. Those are actually tomatoes. In Canada, I heard the Paperpot chain is not approved for organic growing because it contains acetone. Will the company address this issue? And the company is certainly aware of the need for organic certification here. And as they develop new chains, they're constantly working on the ingredients that go into them. The goal is to have a chain that is organic approved eventually. So that is in process and being worked on, as far as I know. What material do you cover these crops with after they are done in order to block out as much light as possible? My favorite is to use what's called a silage tarp. These are agricultural tarps that have resistance to UV degradation built into them. We've had our tarps, some of them for more than 7 or 8 growing seasons, so they can last a long time. But if you just go to your hardware store and buy a large sheet of plastic, it'll break down in the sun. So you want to look for silage tarp. And many of the places that I showed earlier where you can buy the Paperpot system, they also sell silage tarps. The shipping's kind of expensive, so ideally you'd find one at a local farm supply. You had your beds at 70 feet, but would it be possible to alter the height or width to 35 feet by 84 inches? And the short answer is yes. There's certainly no reason you couldn't. We do have 12 inches between the rows. And I'll show you in the greenhouse, we do have beds that some of them are 35 feet in length, and those would obviously accommodate one chain and not 2 chains. And we actually have some beds that are half of 35. What's that come to? 17 and a half, I think. And that would accommodate half a chain. So I'll show you some different options for bed layout in a minute. And have a question. I was about to ask about the hemp chains. Okay. I'm struggling with small plants getting covered by soil. Hang on to that question. I'm going to address it in a second. It's a really good question. I was asking about the transplants. You were using the Paperpot for something that looked like beans or sunflowers. Was it either of those? Oh, okay. I get it. So yeah, those were beans. Those were not sunflowers. I've never tried sunflowers with Paperpot, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. And we use 5 or 6 mil tarps. We use the thicker 6 mil tarps. And I think we're through our Q&A. So great questions, and keep them coming. I'm going to run through a list of crops that we have done successfully with the paper potter, just so you can see the range of what's available. Hockerite turnips are a wonderful crop because they grow away from one another. You can see the picture here that we put between 4 and 6 seeds in each cell, and then let the clump cluster and grow them in clusters 6 inches apart from one another. The rows would be about 12 inches apart. Edamame, any type of legume or bean has worked well for us. In a few minutes, we'll do some transplanting. In the midwinter, I like to do baby greens with the system with the 2-inch chains. And you can see those pictured on the left here, because what we can do essentially is grow these for half their life cycle in the house under grow lights, so which is much lower cost than heating a greenhouse. And so we can go 3 weeks or so and then transplant, and then in another 4 or 5 weeks, we're typically ready to harvest, depending on the weather. And if we would direct seed the baby greens, we're going to be looking at a long 14 weeks or more from seed to harvest. So we cut that cycle time just about in half or more, actually, by paper potting midwinter. So we have space between our tomatoes early season, and actually that's the season we're in right now. We're about ready to transplant tomatoes, so I'd like to maximize that room between tomatoes and tuck in a couple of quick crops. Paper potter is a wonderful way to do this. You can see as the crops are growing, we've got turnips in the middle about ready to harvest, and bok choys here that are basically ready to harvest. And when those crops are harvested, we'll cover the paths with some landscape fabric and use that area as a walkway for pruning and trellising. Onions are a wonderful crop here. We've got 2-inch spacing on the onions. And I got a hand. John Henderson wanted to say something. So John, you're live at this point. If you want to say something, go ahead. You'll need to unmute. It looks like you're muted.
Sorry, I'm at an airport right now, so hopefully
you
could get a lot of background noise. I just wanted to clear this information that was stated by an earlier question. There was never acetone in the paper pots. That was misinformation that was spread by someone that didn't know their chemistry. And the paper pots are approved for use on organic farms. I received word of that today.
No kidding. Okay, well, you're getting some exciting news. That's is that in the U.S. or Canada?
In the U.S.
Okay.
Canadian rules are different.
Okay. So excellent. So that hopefully helps clarify things. I found the radishes actually are sort of mediocre with the system. You will not get perfectly shaped radishes. They'll be a bit misshapen. However, they do grow faster because you can grow these under grow lights for a couple of weeks before transplanting them. Beets, again, I've not had real good luck with them, to be honest. We're going to try some this afternoon. You do get good spacing with them, but again, you have a bit of deformity with the beet, but it is so convenient to be able to transplant with paper pots with beets compared to transplanting by hand, or certainly direct seeding, because they're such slow germinators. Here we have green beans in early May that are ready to harvest because we paper potted them in a month or so ahead of time. And one of the beautiful things about this tool is that you can cheat the seasons in a way that you can't by direct seeding. We're going to do some beans a little later on too. So let me reiterate that the tool is cool. I think it's the next generation tool, and it's simple enough that even our kids have gotten into using it and helping us fill these trays and do the transplanting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a break here and stop the screen. We're going to change cameras. And I'm going to show you how we actually use the Paperpot system, please do raise your hand and let us know if we're having some technological problems. I'm a organic farmer, not a tech nerd, but we're trying to make it work. So first, I mentioned the hemp chains, and that's what you're seeing here. And what you have are several options now in chains. This would be 2-inch chains that unravel at 2-inch spacing here. These would unravel at 6-inch spacing, which say HC15. And there would be chains that unravel at 4-inch spacing too. So you really have quite a range of options. And what the first step in this system here, and I should say that you should keep these in plastic because they will dry out and the glue can separate if they desiccate. So we do keep them wrapped and keep them in the house. Don't let the sun beat down on them. So our first step is to insert the frames into the chains. And that's going to let us open them a bit like an accordion. In our propagation house here, I like to keep all the supplies close to where we're using them. I'm a bit of a lean nerd, as you know, and so we want everything within arm's reach as much as practical. And so here we have frames that we're going to suspend the chain onto. And here we have support trays. Okay, so we're all set. And we're going to pop this in here, and we're going to go ahead and put potting mix in here. And we use Vermont compost 4-8. It is a chunkier compost. It has actual compost in it. And you see that there are sticks, there are little pebbles in the mix, and that's fine. We haven't had issues. Sometimes I'll pull out the larger sticks, but it has worked. This particular mix has worked nicely. And you see that the mix is a bit on the dry side. I don't like a wet, soppy mix because it's easier to really fill those holes if you don't have a wet, soppy mix. And what I'm going to do is pretty well fill it. And then to make sure the corners and the edges are filled, I'm going to grab a baseball-sized chunk and really kind of grind it in along the edges and really grind it in those corners. And so for good germination, someone was asking some tips for good germination. That's one of them, to make sure you're really well filled in your chains. So I keep a brush on hand, and I'm going to brush fairly aggressively. And what you can hopefully see is the honeycomb starting to become visible. And that's really handy because then it's it's easier to use your dibbling tool. So we have 263 dibbles on here because my kids were playing with it and they broke one of the dibbles. So we're short just one, but that's fine. And this is just a matter of lining this up with each of the holes and giving a good press. And then I have to press that last one out by hand. Sometimes I go in the house and grab the kids and make them do it. Okay. So this is cool. This is a 2-plate gravity seeder. And you'll see that the top plate has small holes and the bottom plate has larger holes. Okay. We can remove this plate easily, unscrewing here and unscrewing here. And what that does, see, we got this plate can come in and out. And then we could, if we wanted to, put in plates that have larger sized openings here. The one that we use most often is the 4 mm plate. And that's what we're going to use here today. So the little red set screw that I'm putting in here is, its purpose in life is to hold those two plates fairly close together so that seeds don't slip between the two plates. So with small seeded crops, that can especially be an issue. Okay, so we have pelleted head lettuce going in here. Pelleted seeds obviously work very nicely in here, but we'll do beets and other seeds that are not pelleted in the system too. And then you simply move those seeds around, and it really just takes a second or two until each of those seeds finds itself a hole. And then what I'm simply going to do is line up the plate with each of the cells. See what's happening. And then I'm going to align the plates. And boom, they've dropped. Give it a little tap, and it looks like well, a few of them need a little extra help, but we'll pull this off, and you can see that we have seeded 264 seeds in just a few seconds. Okay, and then you can dump your seeds back into your container. And for the sake of time, I'm gonna keep moving ahead here. And the next step is simply to cover these seeds, and I just use my hand. So I don't know if Nicole, you can zoom in and see that, just a gentle rub on here, and it covers these seeds, and that's it. Now, well, we can remove our frame at this point. And we'll go ahead and water these seeds in. Okay, usually I'll do 5 to 10 trays at a time. And that's the reason I have so many frames in storage here, so that we can really line up and have a production line going. But it's a really fast way to do your transplanting, and it's sort of fun to do. Okay, what I'd like to do now is take this into the germination chamber and show you some tips for getting really good germination from these seeds in here. So I feel like I'm on the set of Mr. Rogers. So follow me, kids. So we're coming into our sort of multi-purpose processing room here. And for the cool crops, such as our lettuces, like what this is here, we'll simply set this on the floor. And you can see that we have some lettuce down here that we seeded up last week that's still coming, because we have cold cement and lettuce likes it chilly for germination. We found that that works fine. You can also set up a germination chamber, such as you see here. That's just a fancy word for an upright refrigerator. And what we've done is hooked an Inkbird thermostat up to it. And these are, $30 or so, an Amazon purchase. And what that thermostat does is there's a probe that we've set in here, and that probe reads the temperature in here. We've plugged a crock pot into the Inkbird. So the Inkbird tells that crock pot to turn on and off depending on the temperature inside here, and it's accurate within 1 or 2 degrees. And so that's the best tip I have for getting good, consistent germination with this system, because these cells are tiny. They're about 1 inch in depth. And if you put this on a heating Matt, you'll dry out what's in here fairly quickly. You'll have to, or else you'll have to set up a watering or a misting system and be really consistent with it. In practice in here, we just set the tray in here, and I'll just set trays one right on top of the other here. And we can fill probably 30 or more Paperpot sealing trays in here at a time. So it's very space efficient too. And then we'll close it up here. We'll set our germination temperature here. If you're not sure what temperature to germinate a crop, then use Google and just Google what's the optimum germination temperature for green beans, tomatoes, eggplant, etc. Set that temp in here and walk away from it. It's really that simple. The piece that you do need to pay attention to is you need to check it at least on a daily basis. And when those seeds do start to pop, you'll need to remove it fairly quickly and get it under some grow lights, or take it out to a propagation house, because you'll quickly have a plate of spaghetti noodles if you simply ignore them in there. So after this stage here, we use the propagation house, except in midwinter, where it's lower cost to grow crops under a grow light system. We use the newer LED grow lights. I highly recommend. The Mars Hydro have worked for us for several growing seasons. And for tomatoes, we crank up the amount of lumens. For lettuces and other crops, you can dial down the lumens and save yourself a penny or two on electricity. And so in midwinter, we would simply set the crop underneath the grow light here for about 3 weeks, and then it's ready for transplant. This would be a good break point if anyone has further questions at this point.
Okay. System allow for companion plant growth?
Question is, does the Paperpot system allow for companion planting? Yes, and I'm going to do a bit of companion planting in a minute here. That's a great question.
Do you think you could multi-sow bulb fennel?
Could you multi-sow bulb fennel? I've not tried it. You certainly could, but you wouldn't have it wouldn't be as big and uniform as if you grew them separate. I have done bulb fennel with the 6-inch chains, and have had nice, uniform bulb fennel.
Do you have a chart of how long you grow different crops in the chains before transplanting?
That's a great question. I don't. However, I can tell you that it is between 2 weeks and 3 weeks for just about everything. The beans and legumes, you're looking at perhaps just under 2 weeks. Everything else, that 2 to 3 week window seems to be about the right time.
How do you harden off greens after 7 weeks?
How do I harden them off? I have not found a need to really harden. Okay, so question is, how do we harden off the greens? And I found that we don't really need to, just transplanting them in the greenhouse without hardening off, and they've done fine. If we're doing field transplanting from a propagation house, then I might harden them off. And I've found that simply setting them outside for one afternoon is usually enough.
Somebody read that Paperpots were approved for certified organic farms in 2022 in the US. Is that correct?
Well, John Henriksen, who owns Small Farm Works, is here, and he just made an announcement that they've just approved the Paperpot system for organic use in the US.
Does Paperpot.co sell the Niton pot transplanter from Japan?
I'm not sure.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, does Paperpot.co sell the Japanese model transplanter? And to be honest, I'm not sure. There are so many places now selling this system that many places are now selling a Paperpot transplanter that they have manufactured, or they work with a supplier to manufacture them. I know Johnny's Seeds just this year came out with one. They're working with the local fabricator on that tool. And there are models that are sold from Japan too, the HP16 being the most common. I'll get into some recommendations on which transplanter to purchase in a minute when we go out to the tunnel.
How much faster decomposing is the hemp chain?
Yeah,
Can you repeat the question?
how much faster decomposing is the hemp Paperpot chain? And I've never actually done a side-by-side test, so I can't tell you that it's 14 days faster. But I would put it in the range of a month to month and a half.
Have you ever had any issues with the chains not lining up so the dibbler isn't centered? And would that be a sign of a warped chain?
The chain's not lining, oh, that does happen sometimes. And for me, when that happens is when I'm using chains that have sat around my farm for maybe 9 or 10 months or more. So the newer chains tend to unravel and keep their shape nicer than chains that have sat around for a long time. And you can kind of see it too, when you unravel that chain, if they're kind of bending one direction, you can kind of, shape shift them so they're more uniform.
Have you ever tried using a vacuum seeder with Paperpot? And can you repeat the question?
Can we, have we ever used a vacuum seeder at Paperpot? And the answer is no, we haven't, but that system does exist. And if you are a larger operation than we have here, you might want to consider.
There's like another 15, maybe.
Another 15? Okay, we're going to move out to the greenhouse. And I love all these questions, so keep them coming. So what you're looking at is essentially clay bottom farm. We've got 1/3 of an acre, about 1/3 of which is in tunnels, about 5,000 square feet. In tunnels, we've got the propagation house attached to the barn house. We live in half of this structure here, and the other half we use for farm purpose. This tunnel here has tomatoes in it, and tomorrow we're going to set out tomatoes. But to show you how we try to maximize room between rows of tomatoes, I'll let Nicole just give you a quick peek in here. But we have our greens seated between rows of tomatoes. These greens will not be in here much longer. We'll get a couple of harvests, and then this landscape fabric, we will unravel the fabric, and this will all be covered with landscape fabric here for when it's time to trellis and harvest the tomatoes. So that the paper potter works really nicely for maximizing every square inch around tomatoes. Okay, then we have a larger production tunnel in here. And we just got done doing a round of harvest in here. We'll harvest between 50 to 100 pounds of greens a week on our farm. And this time of year, November to March, it almost, virtually all of them come from the greenhouse. And so it's important to keep greens cycling. You see some mature crops, you see some younger crops that were just put in. So basically almost every week of the year, we're cycling some crop in and out of here. And Paperpot helps make that more possible. So let me talk about the tool itself while we're in here. Maybe Nicole, you want to go around here. This is the original HP 10, which is a legacy tool. It's not available at this point, although John tells me that he's working on getting this tool reintroduced. And the reason I like it and prefer this, I've tried some of the others, is because it's such a lightweight tool and it does everything I need it to do. And it's worked well for 9+ growing seasons. And so why get off a horse that's running just fine? And a couple of things about the tool is that you can adjust it to fit yourself. It's a human scale tool. Like I said, this handle will come down and up as you need. You can adjust the depth at which your transplants are going. This is very important to get the depth correct. Someone was asking, well, how do you prevent covering your crop? And more our problem is, how do you get the crop in the ground deep enough? And this will let you adjust your depth here. There are 6 or so settings, and you'll want to really dial that in. So I said there's a learning curve with the tool. And in reality, we're no-till here. And so we have soils that are fairly stiff. So we're going to transplant this or I'm going to set it for its deepest setting here. And we've made one other modification to the tool. There's a furrower down here that cuts a furrow that the transplants will go into. And we've removed the shallow furrower that comes with the tool. And Nitin sent me a deeper furrower. And John tells me that these will, they are currently available if you have one of these HP 10s, and they will very soon be available for the HP 16 transplanter. And we've, just in the short time that we used it, I found that it really helps for our no-till situation to make sure our plants are going in the ground deep enough with just the tool, not tilling ahead of the tool. Now, having said all this, many farmers have the experience that they have better success with the tool tilling beforehand. So if you're on a till system or can even tilt the top couple of inches, that might help with covering your plant up too much or not getting your depth proper. Okay, a couple other adjustments to the tool. You can bring these wheels up here. These are press wheels that press soil in around the crop after it's transplanted. You don't have to use them. Maybe the press wheels are part of the problem. In the front end of the tool here, these pieces can be moved in various positions, and you can put shorter or longer ones in, and you take a week or two, really dial it into your conditions to make sure it's set so it'll work for you. So that's about it. You can see I can carry it with one hand. It's got a handy balance point right in the middle. And we store the tool just right out in the greenhouse. To show you a couple of crops that you can use with this tool, this is cilantro that we transplanted a few weeks ago here. Just like those turnips that I showed you, we're going to put a cluster of 4 to 6 seeds, and cilantro likes to grow in clusters away from itself. Within a month, this will be one sheet of green cilantro here. And we'll do this, we'll plant cilantro maybe on average once a month throughout the year so that we have it continuous. So we're going to do some onions here, make a wonderful transplant crop. We're going to try some beets, may not work. We're gonna just do a little experimenting here. And as promised, we've got some green beans here, which is the first crop we're gonna put in a minute. So I know folks were asking about bed preparation. And just to show you that what we did in here, I'm too impatient to wait for the silage tarp process in the greenhouse. Okay, I want to get out a crop and put another one in faster than that. And so what we'll do is simply pull crops up by hand sometimes. And this was a bed of spinach. We simply pulled it by hand, which left the ground somewhat rough in here. And so if it's useful, if needed, I like to use these Haas sweeps on a wheel hoe here. So it's a very gentle way to gently lift the soil and prep it for paper potting. Okay, so we're not pulverizing, we're not mixing the layers of the soil with this tool. And it's a great tool for 2 people to use too if your soils are really stiff. We'll put a rope on here. One person will pull the tool this direction, and another person will simply guide the tool behind. Okay? So this is what we use instead of a broad fork. You won't see broad forks in use much. Maybe a head of carrots will really want to go deep, but for 90% of what we do, this is sufficient and much faster and easier. And I should mention that there is an electric version of the tool too. Tillmore makes an e-ox wheel hoe, and we use that quite a bit, especially in the field. Okay, so really all we do then is take a bed rake. This is the 30-inch Austrian bed rake that Johnny sells. And simply skim the surface. And what that's going to do is pull up larger pieces that are maybe 1 inch, 1 inch in diameter or more. and pull them up because these might end up gumming up the transplanter. And that's about it. Really just a quick sweep one direction. And then I'll come back the other. And the block that we're going to transplant into here is 35 feet divided by 2. So that's actually 17. Is that correct? Is my math correct? Something like that, 15 to 17 feet. And we should get 1 tray of green beans. I'm going to do 3 rows in this block here as a demonstration. So this is an excellent tool to use with your kids or with a buddy system. And I'll show you the reason here in a minute. But what I like to do is go ahead and run the tool without transplants for a few feet, and then maybe dig this out a little bit by hand. And then we're all set up for the transplants to come in here. Okay, and I forgot one piece. So yeah, Andrew, if you don't mind being the buddy here, I'm going to tuck our ramp underneath here, and the ramp simply makes it easier to unravel the chain. And then I'm going to peel off this outer piece. And we'll just tuck that in here. And then you want to find the end and you simply pull it. Now, I was to be honest, a little late seeding the beans here. These are under 2 weeks. They're probably 11 or 12 days. And really 14 days might have been a more optimum, but that's okay. You can, and John likes to tell people, you can plant with this system here even before your crop has come up. So you see some beans are just right now coming up, but that's fine. I think they'll probably still make it. And as you know, it's March. It's a crazy time to be planting beans. I could not have gotten germination if I'd have put beans in the soil, even in a greenhouse. But with the propagation house that I showed you, we got good germination, and the beans transplant themselves, almost. So I'm going fairly deep with this tool. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and rip it here when we're near the end. And I'll give a little lift, and then the buddy system. Actually, I'm not leaving Andrew very much to do here. There'll be something for you to do here soon, I promise. But the buddy would go along and tuck any plants in that weren't covered sufficient. So we'll do a run in the middle here. You'll note that I am walking on the bed surface. That's fine. I haven't had problems resulting from putting a little bit of weight on it. I'm not doing you'll note I'm not doing a disco dance on the bed surface. So here, Andrew might just, tuck these guys in, just to get the bed going. Then you got to remember to set these in here. And boom, insta gardening. We should be harvesting beans certainly by mid-May. Again, we'll do a little. Get this. Oops. Okay, question is, what is the seed plate setup for these beans? And to be honest, there's not a seed plate that I found that works well. And we just put these in by hand, one by hand. But beans in northern Indiana, will sell. People love their green beans here. However, they can be a trick to germinate in the springtime because soils can stay cold for a long time. And so for your first seeding, you know, maybe by June, you can certainly hand seed your beans and expect good germination. Until then, go ahead and paper pot them, and you're about guaranteed good germination. Okay, so that 35 feet or that 70 feet in length is actually a bit short. And that's by design because I like to have one row of plants left over at the end for just going in and tucking in where any gaps might have happened. So there we've got one here, and we could go along and fill other gaps if depending on how I'm a perfectionist, and so that helps scratch that itch. Okay, let's do some other crops here, and maybe Nicole, you could ask a question or two. Okay, how do we handle corners, tight corners, and in walls with the paper pot? And that's a really good question. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate what you can do in that situation. Let's pretend we have a solid wall here because we're at the end of the greenhouse. So what I would do is pull up the wheels and go all the way to the end. So here the wheels would be touching the end. And then start at that point. And then start that first, foot or so by hand. But really I have a little bit of room between the end of the greenhouse and where the beds begin, and that's really never been an issue. So it fits very nicely in tight spaces. Andrew, I wonder if you can grab the tray that's on top.
Chains do you estimate you use per year?
So how many chains do we use in a yearly basis? And my best estimate is that we go through 150. We went through about 150 seed trays last year. Okay, Andrew, I need the orange ramp that we left in the other tool. Excellent question. Can you bottom water with the paper pot trays? And the answer is yes. Paperpot.co sells a tray, an impervious tray that fits this system very nicely for bottom watering. And which reminds me that one trick to making this whole thing work is to do your bottom watering, especially the day of transplanting. So this afternoon before the webinar began, we soaked these guys hard. We filled the bottom watering trays about an inch and set these guys in there for half an hour or so and let them really absorb. And so these are heavy, dense trays here full of water going in the ground. And that really helps the transition. So the question is, can we use non-pelleted lettuce? And the answer is yes, and that's the next thing we're going to transplant. And so I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so we have spinach. So for the most part, I like to direct seed spinach. However, the first crop of the year, it's nice to get a jump and a paper pot them. And if I have a little window, like I have a bit of a window where I can squeeze a quick crop in before a summer crop would go in here, then paper pot lets me jump through that window. So these will be ready to harvest. I'll bet within a month we'll be harvesting off of these. So here I'm just almost covering them too much. There I did cover some too much. And so as I come back this direction, we're going to do fairly close spacing. You can see my wheels just probably 4 inches from the row that I just put in. So we're going to drop these in here. I noted I was covering things a bit too much, so we're just going to do a little bit of an adjustment here. And that's going to raise the depth. If the cells have too much potting mix, does it create an issue while transplanting? I've never overstuffed the cells with potting mix. That's, for me, that's not ever been an issue. That's a good question.
What temperature do you like to use in a chamber with multiple different crops?
Okay, so the question is what temperature do I like to set the germination chamber if I have multiple crops? And for most of my crops, I set the chamber at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Just about everything does well at that temperature. From tomatoes to peppers to everything in between. So what I do to simplify the farm, I have a set of hot crops and a set of cool crops. The lettuce and spinach, for example, being cool crops, just about everything else being a hot crop. I prefer hotter temperatures for germination. So the cool crops, I would set that chamber at 68 Fahrenheit, or else I'd keep it in a cool room outside of the chamber. And for everything else, I set it to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, Andrew, if you want to tuck the lettuce on here, the lettuce being the top, next one here. So these were non-pelleted lettuces, and I put between 4 and 6 seeds in each. We used, I believe we used that 4-millimeter plate, and which gave us an average of between 4 and 6 seeds in each cell. So yeah, the two ways to do your depth adjusting. First, you can get a deeper furrower attachment here. Take off the shallow furrower and put a deeper one. That lets you go a good inch deeper. And then you can do a depth adjustment right here. And actually, I'm going to go all the way deep because I see I got some, floppy heads on here. This is not head lettuce. This is I will grow this for multi-cut baby salad. The greenhouse is heated to 32. So we keep crops just above freezing. And I did so after we got the lettuce in here. Oh, here we're going a little too deep. So I'm going to go back and do an adjustment. Oh, still a little on the deep side. So the spinach, so there we've got the adjustment. I think we're about at the right height here. I don't like to see paper sticking above the soil surface. I'd rather see that covered. And yet here we covered up too much. And so the sweet spot is somewhere right in the middle. So I'm going to do another quick adjustment. And we'll see. So I was saying spinach and the Asian greens in here, we grew without any heat whatsoever throughout the winter. It's only, so tomatoes, I set it up to 55 Fahrenheit. And you can see we're getting ready for tomatoes to come in here. And so in a week or so, when the tomatoes come in, we'll turn up the heat. So you see with all that adjustment we were doing, we've got some that didn't sit in as nicely as I would have wanted. And so we'll have to go back by hand and tuck in a few places. Okay. I think time's going to get away from us, and I wanted to show how the onions would work in this system. And then I want to leave plenty of time for more of your questions too. So we're going to move over here and get a row of onions put in. So what's happening here is the same thing I showed you in the other greenhouse. We've put extra landscape fabric under here. There's a 6 foot, actually 6 foot wide piece. We'll transplant tomatoes in here. We'll open up the holes. We get the transplants set in here. And then after these onions, we'll probably grow these for green onions or babies. After these onions are pulled, we'll go ahead and unravel that landscape fabric here as weed protection. But we've got a bit of real estate here that we may as well take advantage of. So when I'm doing onions, I like to go as deep as the transplanter will allow them to go in. So that's what I'm doing here, just doing another adjustment. Okay, I think we're okay. And just to show you the range of soil types that you can use this tool with, we have been walking and trammeling here. So it's the ground is fairly stiff. We've not tilled it. There's a lot of chunks in here. You could probably direct seed in it, but you wouldn't get the greatest germination. But you can still transplant. The general mindset I have is to do the minimum that you have to get your bed prepped for the crop going in. And so if you don't have to till, then you shouldn't. Okay. So we'll let Andrew go ahead and start tucking. And we'll see what happens here. So I've got it fairly deep. And they do seem to be going in okay. So it's the soil's not filling in quite as much as I would like, and so I'm just going to clean up down here. And yeah, there was a chunk, kind of something stuck on here, a stick or something. And we'll see if that seems to have helped. Now we're transplanting the way it should. Okay, Nicole's telling me it's time to button up. And we'll go ahead and rip it off here. Okay, let's go ahead and answer some of your questions. Andrew, do you want to set this up to get the red beets put in?
Cells in the fever chains too small for some crops that are need to stay in the nursery a little longer. Get a little bit bigger, and can you repeat the question?
So the question is, are the cells big enough for all crops? And the answer is no. Like I said at the beginning, we don't do tomatoes, we don't do eggplants, we don't do peppers with this system, in part because we want a larger mass of potting mix around the roots of those crops.
What's your spacing between the rows?
So that obviously depends on what the crop is. With the beans, I like to have at least 12 inches between rows of beans. With these, the cilantro and the spinach and the other greens, the leafy greens, I like to run that transplanter fairly tight, and so it's actually about 8 inches between rows.
Bottom watering better for prep and transplanting rather than overhead? And can you repeat the question?
Is bottom watering a superior way to go? Absolutely. We're big fans of bottom watering, especially ahead of transplanting. But even if as we're growing out the transplants, we prefer bottom watering.
How does it work transplanting the deep mulch?
How does it work to transplant into deep leaf mulch? Well, that's essentially what you're looking at here. The only fertility we use on our farm is compost that we make from leaves that are collected from within 1.5 miles of the farm. So we're not trucking in amendments. We're not trucking in minerals that were mined and shipped from far distances. Everything is hyper-local here. And that's key to our fertility. You can see the greenness in the spinach around, and that's because of how fresh and mineral rich the compost is. So there is obviously a break point where what we'll do is make compost and we'll wait about a year before applying it. And we found that it has, for us, it's broken down enough. We'll turn that compost 3 or so times before applying the compost. And with leaves and turning it 3 or 4 times in the space of 1 year, it's broken down enough that we can paper pot into it. So, yeah, well, I was going to say it can be too chunky sometimes. And so you'll just have to learn where that break point is.
You store your soil mix and
So what do we store our soil mix in? If you're referring to the compost we make, we just simply have a big pile of leaves that's not under a roof. The potting mix, you can see there's a large bag of potting mix at the front of the greenhouse. We keep it in here. That's shipped to us from Vermont Compost. We keep it in here so that it stays above freezing.
have you ever had any issues with paper pot chains breaking down or getting too soft before transplanting? And can you repeat the
Have we ever had problems with the hemp paper plot chains breaking apart during transplanting? And the short answer is yes, absolutely. If we've kept crops in there for us, it's 4 to 6 weeks or more, then we'll start to get occasional breaks where the glue wants to separate for some reason because it's been sitting in wet for too long. However, as long as we're transplanting at that 3-week mark, we've not had an issue. And you can see that in our conditions, 3 weeks is enough. I actually wouldn't want, bigger transplants to be going in. The exception would be the onions here. And you can see we didn't have any breakage here, but these onions were in those trays for probably 7 or 8 weeks. They do require a little longer.
What variety bean was that?
Yeah, what bean variety? Jade. I like jade because you can achieve multiple harvests with it.
Why not use a 2-inch chain for cilantro?
So why not use a 2-inch chain with cilantro? We certainly have used 2-inch chains with cilantro. The thing is, 2-inch chains only unravel at 44 feet. And these 6-inch chains are 3 times longer. And so there's a cost savings with going a 6-inch chain and then growing them in clusters. And we have our experiences that cilantro actually prefers or seems to like to grow in clusters.
Have you ever tried doing beets without the dibbler when seeding?
Have I tried doing beets without the dibbler tool?
It's on top of the cells.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Favorite of success with less effort.
Oh, I see. So the idea is to put the beet seeds right on the surface and to not use the dibbler tool. Oh, I see. So that then the beet root would stay above the paper. That's an interesting idea. No, I have not tried that, but I'll do it.
The best soil moisture for the paper pot.
Good question. Best soil moisture is actually it can accept a very wide range. We keep it on bit on the dry side because it can sort of gum up the tires, for instance. And it doesn't, the soil doesn't want to, gravity doesn't work so well when the soil's wet and clumpy. And so a bit on the dry side is my preference. However, with transplanting, I like to have soil that's moist and transplants that are moist. So I don't like to transplant into totally dry soil.
Have you ever had any issues with salt or soil buildup in the greenhouse?
Have I had issues with salt or buildup in the greenhouse? And the answer is yeah, we certainly have. And you can probably see a little bit of it here. And it has simply never affected the quality of our crops. If we do a lot of, we can irrigate heavily and flush down those salts too. And we'll do that a couple of times a year just to push them, below soil surface, but they're going to work their way up. And it doesn't necessarily look too attractive to have sort of a white calcium-like salts on the surface, but like I said, it hasn't affected the quality of our crops. 10 questions, and we're going to do a little beet experiment here. One thing I want you to notice is I use pellets for the beets on the back half here, and I use raw seed on the front. And you can see how much nicer the raw seed germinated. And that's the same with carrots, and with a lot of crops, pellets aren't always the way to go. Especially on carrots and beets, I prefer to use raw seeds. And so we've got a bit, it was a bit dark the last couple weeks, and so we've got some legginess going on here, and the beets are just kind of wanting to flop. And so in this case, it may be a good idea to put the wheels on, but maybe not. We'll see. Yeah, so they're kind of going in, but we're kind of covering them too, and it's mediocre success. There's just going to be a lot of tucking in that needs to happen, but we'll certainly get beets ahead of season compared to direct seeding them in here. Okay, so we've got time for a few more questions. Thank you to everyone who's stuck it out.
Do you ever prime your beet seed and repeat the question?
So do you ever prime the beet seeds? No, I never have. Spinach, I do sometimes. Prime the seeds. Priming means you would soak the seeds overnight or 3 or 4 hours before planting. And with beets, I haven't had a problem really with germination as long as they're raw seeds.
Have you calculated the price difference between pelleted and is it negligible?
I can't, sure. Have we calculated the price difference when using pelleted seeds versus non-pelleted? And it's certainly lower costs with non-pellet. I couldn't tell you the exact price difference, and it obviously would change depending on the crop. We consistently use pelleted seeds for lettuce, for the head lettuces. I found that that's worth the price.
Lauren's beet planting always ends up stressed and stunted. Any tips for growing early beets?
So beets don't like it to be too cold. They'll work in here because we're going to keep the temperatures above 32, and we're about ready to turn the heaters up to 55. But I found that they're more of a late spring crop than an early spring crop.
So a few folks are wondering about how you're watering. They don't see any drip tape or sprinklers. Are you just hand watering, and have you noticed any disease on greens?
So the question is, how are we going to irrigate the crops? So in here, we actually did tuck drip tapes in underneath the fabric, the landscape fabric that the tomatoes are going to go into. And we're going to put a drip tape along these onions here, along the beets, and we'll put some drip tapes between the cilantro here. Until the tomatoes go in, however, it's much faster to just overhead irrigate in here. The simplest way I know how to do it is to use a wobbler head here. These are probably less than 20 bucks a piece. They've lasted, I've been farming 17 growing seasons. They've lasted all 17 seasons, and I think I've got 17 more in them. So they're very durable. And then we put steel risers on these guys here. And then we put step-in spike bases. We bought them on Amazon. Orbits, I think, made this particular one. There are probably others. And then simply hook a couple of garden hoses. We like the more commercial 3/4 inch garden hose. And there's plenty of water pressure coming out of here. And if you can, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but we've got a daisy chain, 4 of them in this 150-foot long greenhouse. For the beds that are 70 feet in length, which is the length we use with the Paperpot system, we found that 2 heads covers 70 feet in length and maybe about 35 feet in width. So that'll depend, of course, on your water pressure, but that's just worked well for us.
Since you're using non-pelleted seed, they assume no thinning. How well do things size up?
So non-pelleted seeds with the beets, I assume you're talking about the beets. There's no thinning. The question is, do the crops size up okay if you're using non-pelleted? So with the beets, if you put 1 beet seed in, a beet seed is really a cluster, you know, of 3 to 5 seeds or so. And so we just put 1 beet seed in each cell. And then what came up were 3 to 5 beets. And like the turnips, they will grow away from one another. They're not as uniform perhaps as we'd like, but that's fine. We'll put bunches of baby beets together and then bunches of medium and large size.
The drop seeder you use Quick Click or something else?
Is the drop seeder we use Quick Click or something else? I'm not familiar with Quick Click, so I'm not sure how to answer that question. It's quick, and there is a little bit of a click to it. So,
how many crops on average do your beds in the field and greenhouse do you see in a growing season? So how many times do you flip beds?
So each bed that we have, and there are about 50 beds on the farm, gets flipped at least once. So 2 crops per season in the field. We do at least 3 crops in the greenhouse. We'll do 4, sometimes even more than 4. If we're doing quick solid crop green rotations, for instance, but typically 2 to 4.
So that question was what brand of drop seeder?
I see. I use the Small Farm Works drop seeder.
Okay. Any tips for making sure the seeds drop in the dibbled holes with the drop seeder plate? They often see the holes lined up, drop the seed, but they aren't in the hole.
So the problem, the question is, do I have any tips for making sure seeds fall through the drop seeder into the holes? And my best tip, like I had mentioned, sometimes if you use older chains, as you unravel those chains, they're a little bit cockamamie. And I will go along by hand and just kind of line them up by hand so that the dibbler tool work. If the dibbler tool is lined up and you have holes in each cell, then the drop seeder will work because those two are matched. Spacings are exactly identical with those two. So the dibbler tool is the place to make your chain adjustments. Make sure your dibbler tool works nice, and then come along with your 2-plate drop seeder.
Have you ever tried the non-chain paper pots?
The non-chain paper pots I have tried them, and I like them. To be honest, we don't have enough crops that we'd use that system with, so we're not really using it on our farm, but it's a really cool idea, really cool concept.
One person's wondering if you could talk about what stage of growth for various crops should be at before transplanting and how important it is to time.
So timing, so the question is, what stage of growth should plants be at before transplanting? And timing is very critical. And what I like to see are true leaves. So if I'm transplanting just at cotyledons would be the first green that comes up out of a seed. And if it's just cotyledon, the plant has struggles a bit to get through that transplant transition. But if I see a couple of true leaves, and what I think of is I want the true leaves to be the size of a mouse's ear. So the spinach that we just transplanted, well, here, I'll show you some purple mizuna that we're putting in. It's just a good question. I want to go a little deep on it. So you see we have the cotyledons would be first greenery that comes, well, purple in this case, that comes out of the seed. And then the true leaves will look like what you expect the plant to look like. And whoops, when true leaves are about the size of a mouse's ear is an optimum time for transplanting, I've found.
Jacob's wondering, he said he has 2 and 4-inch chains. What crops would work best with the 6-inch chains, which he doesn't have? Wondering about the best chain for lettuce.
Okay, so the best chain for a head lettuce that you're going to do multi-cuts with, a Solanova type, and I should say we like to use intercut, is the most productive crop on our farm with Paperpot. The intercut lettuce is a big frilly leaf lettuce that you can get lots of cuts on for our spring mix. And Ruby Go would be number 2. So intercut, Ruby Go, those are probably the top 2 crops on our farm with Paperpot, and we use the 6-inch chains on them. Really, onions are the only 2-inch chain, in the beans, I suppose, are the only 2-inch chain crops that I'm growing at this point. And everything else is on a 6-inch system. I try to simplify and not use the 4-inch chain, even though 4 inches might be more optimum for larger size onions and a few things. But then in the 6-inch system, I would do the greens that I mentioned, the head lettuce. I would do the cilantro. We do basil in that system. And the chart that I showed you earlier has the full list. I'm going to plug my book, The Lean Micro Farm, here, and it's full of charts showing you what's worked on our farm. But most of our crops we're using the 6-inch.
Do you have any recommendations on potting soil aside from Vermont compost for paper chains?
Yeah, the question is, do we have recommendations on potting soil besides Vermont compost for paper chains? I've used the Dairy Dew product out of northern Michigan, from Morgan Composting, and that's where it worked. And I haven't really experimented much beyond those.
Do you know who sells a dual transplanter system?
See if John Hendrickson at Small Farm Works. That's a really good question for him. the question is, where can you get a dual transplant system? I assume you mean where you have a chain of, a gang, I should say, of 2 Paperpot transplanters together.
Lily's wondering about cover crops in between slower growing things like tomatoes.
Well, we are putting cash crops. Well, like you saw in the small greenhouse, baby leafy greens are a great quick crop to tuck in there. You could certainly grow cover crops too, but just make sure they're short and quick. We have grown some of the clovers, some of the lower growing clovers between tomatoes, and those work nicely too.
John says some crops can be planted before germination or just as they germinate, like carrots and sunflower, to get best results.
That's right. So John was chiming in to say that sometimes you can achieve success by transplanting even before germination.
So any difference between the Pro Series Paperpot transplanter versus the original?
So the difference between the Pro Series and the original, I assume you mean the HP16, has a wider arc to it. It stands up a little bit more. I'm told it weighs a bit more too. I haven't, weighed each of them. And there are a lot of growers using the 16 and they're really happy with it. And I've found that the HP10, like I said, it's worked 9+ growing seasons without a single hitch. So I'm hesitant to even try anything else. But there's a lot of transplanters on the market. And I certainly have not tried all of them. I can say that the HP10 works.
I have 2 more questions. What do you use to prep your beds? Do you use any compost or soil management? Have you ever used mushroom compost?
So the question is, what do we do for bed preparation? And have we ever used mushroom compost? In a nutshell, what we do is called the deep mulch method. We collect a lot of leaves from within 1.5 miles of us. We turn those leaves 3 or 4 times. So it's not a very fine compost. It's a bit chunky. That's fine. I'm a perfectionist, but I can be imperfect at times too. And then we'll put 4 inches of that compost directly on the soil surface, creating a deep mulch. Okay, and then we'll transplant directly into it. And once every other year, we'll add a skim coating of about 1 inch of compost to feed the microbials. This is a biological system. The idea is we want lots of carbon, lots of food for the microbes, and by feeding them with some fresh compost once every other year, and by using the tarping method to smother crops, keep them in place, keep the roots. The rule we have on our farm is the roots have to stay in the ground. And as those roots decompose, they provide food for the microbes too. So I've not used mushroom compost because we have the leaves available here that are local. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. And what I do recommend though, with any compost, is that you try it out on a small plot first before you spread it across the whole farm to make sure it's going to work, and to test for toxins, to know where your ingredients are coming from. Golf courses, for instance, can be problematic.
And Jonathan's wondering, when you pull the paper powder, it mounds up the soil along the outer edges, creating more kind of a channel that the plants sit in. Do you ever flatten that out or leave it to cook time? Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so and I'm going to grab a tool to answer that question here. So and we're actually out of time. So this will unfortunately have to be my last question, but he's saying there is a bit of a divot that's left behind here. And you can there are different tools that folks will sell you to do this, but you can take a tool and kind of flatten it. To be quite honest, I usually just leave it, and the rain and natural conditions will fill that in over time. But thank you again, everyone. This has been a lot of fun. I think we made it without a tech hitch, and we'll send each of you a link to the full video very soon, so you can go back and watch anything that you might have missed. Thanks again. Have a great evening, and let's do this again.